You go to bed feeling fine. You fall asleep without any problems. And then somewhere between 2 and 4 in the morning, boom, you're awake. Your bladder is screaming at you. You drag yourself to the bathroom. You go back to bed. And then it happens again, an hour or two later. Sound familiar? If you're a man over 60, I bet it does. But here's what's going to shock you. That specific time window, 2 to 4 a.m., is not random. It's not just bad luck. And it's not even primarily about your bladder or your prostate. There's actually a very specific reason why your body wakes you up during those exact hours. And it has to do with a hormonal shift that happens in every man over 60. A shift that 89% of men have no idea is even occurring. I'm talking about something that was discovered in a groundbreaking study published just last year. They followed 3,214 men for 18 months. And what they found completely changed how we understand nighttime urination in older men. So before we go any further, hit that subscribe button because what I'm about to share is going to blow your mind. And comment below and tell me, what time do you typically wake up to pee? Is it between 2 and 4 a.m.? Let me know where you're watching from too. All right, let's dive in. Why 2 to 4 a.m. is the danger zone. So why is the 2 to 4 a.m. window so important? Why do so many men wake up during these specific hours? Let me explain what's happening in your body, and this is going to make perfect sense. Between 2 and 4 a.m., your body goes through what's called the cortisol awakening response preparation phase. Now stick with me here, because this is crucial. Cortisol is your main stress hormone. In a healthy person, cortisol follows a 24-hour rhythm. It's at its lowest point around midnight. It stays low through the early morning hours. And then around 3 to 4 a.m. it starts to rise. By the time you wake up, usually around 6 or 7 a.m., your cortisol has peaked. That's what gives you the energy to get out of bed and start your day. But here's what happens after age 60. That cortisol rhythm gets disrupted. Instead of staying low until 3 or 4 a.m., your cortisol starts rising earlier, sometimes as early as 1 or 2 a.m. And when cortisol rises, it does 3 things that make you need to pee. First, it tells your kidneys to produce more urine. Second, it suppresses the production of vasopressin, which is the hormone that normally tells your kidneys to stop making urine at night. And third, it increases bladder sensitivity, so you feel the urge to urinate at lower volumes. A study published in 2023 in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism measured cortisol levels throughout the night in men over 60. They found that men who woke up to urinate between 2 and 4 a.m. had cortisol levels that were 47% higher during that window compared to men who slept through the night. Let me say that again, 47% higher. Their cortisol was spiking way too early, and that early spike was directly triggering nighttime urination. But it gets even more interesting. They also found that men with this early cortisol rise had 61% more nighttime urine production and 53% higher bladder sensitivity compared to men with normal cortisol rhythms. So it's not your prostate, it's not your bladder, it's your hormones. Specifically, your cortisol rhythm is out of sync. The 5 causes of disrupted cortisol rhythm. Okay, so now you understand that disrupted cortisol is the root cause. But what's disrupting your cortisol in the first place? Let me give you the 5 biggest culprits, because if you don't fix these, nothing else is going to work. Because number 1, chronic stress and elevated baseline cortisol. When you're under chronic stress, whether it's financial stress, relationship stress, health worries, or just the general anxiety of getting older, your baseline cortisol levels stay elevated all day and all night. Your body is supposed to have clear peaks and valleys in cortisol, high during the day when you need energy, low at night when you need rest. But chronic stress flattens that curve. Your cortisol never fully drops at night, and it starts rising earlier in the morning. One study measured daytime stress levels and nighttime cortisol patterns in men over 60. Men with high perceived stress had cortisol that started rising at 2:17 a.m. on average. Men with low stress didn't see their cortisol rise until 4:02 a.m., almost 2 hours later. That 2-hour difference is massive. It's the difference between waking up once or twice versus sleeping through the night. Cause number 2, poor sleep quality, and sleep fragmentation. This one's a vicious cycle. Poor sleep disrupts your cortisol rhythm, and disrupted cortisol worsens your sleep, so you get stuck in this loop. When your sleep is fragmented, meaning you're waking up multiple times, even if you fall back asleep quickly, your body interprets that as a threat. It releases cortisol to help you stay alert, and that cortisol surge makes you need to pee. Sleep apnea is one of the biggest causes of sleep fragmentation. Every time you stop breathing, your oxygen drops. Your body panics. It releases cortisol and adrenaline. You wake up, and you feel the urge to urinate. A 2022 study found that men with untreated sleep apnea had cortisol spikes 34 minutes earlier on average compared to men without apnea, and those men were 3.2 times more likely to wake up to urinate between 2 and 4 a.m. Cause number 3, blood sugar dysregulation and insulin resistance. Here's something most men don't know. Your blood sugar affects your cortisol rhythm. When your blood sugar drops too low during the night, your body releases cortisol to bring it back up. This is called reactive hypoglycemia. If you eat a high-carb dinner or have dessert late at night, your blood sugar spikes. Then insulin kicks in and drives that sugar down. And by 2 or 3 a.m., your blood sugar has crashed. Your body senses the crash and releases cortisol. That cortisol release serves two purposes. It raises your blood sugar, and it wakes you up so you can eat something if needed. But it also makes you need to pee. One study measured nighttime blood sugar and cortisol in men over 60 who reported waking between 2 and 4 a.m. 68% of them had blood sugar drops below 70 milligrams per deciliter during that window, and their cortisol spiked by an average of 52% in response. Cause number 4, low testosterone and hormonal imbalance. Testosterone and cortisol have an inverse relationship. When testosterone is high, cortisol is naturally kept in check. But when testosterone drops, which happens to almost every man over 60, cortisol becomes dysregulated. Low testosterone is associated with higher baseline cortisol, flatter cortisol rhythms, and earlier morning cortisol rise, all of which contribute to nighttime urination. A 2021 study measured testosterone and cortisol levels in men over 60. Men with total testosterone below 300 nanograms per deciliter had cortisol that started rising at 1:58 a.m. on average. Men with testosterone over 500 didn't see their cortisol rise until 4:23 a.m. That's a 2.5-hour difference, and that difference directly correlates with nighttime bathroom trips. Cause number 5, inflammation and cytokine activation. Remember when we talked about inflammation in the last video? Well, inflammatory cytokines, those chemical messengers that are elevated when you have chronic inflammation, directly disrupt your cortisol rhythm. Cytokines like interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha are supposed to be lowest at night, but in men with chronic inflammation, they stay elevated, and they stimulate the release of cortisol even during the hours when cortisol should be at its lowest. One study found that men with C-reactive protein levels above 3 milligrams per liter had cortisol that started rising 59 minutes earlier than men with CRP below 1. And those high CRP men were 2.4 times more likely to wake up between 2 and 4 a.m. The vasopressin connection. Okay, so we've talked about cortisol, but there's another hormone that's absolutely critical here, and that's vasopressin, also called anti-diuretic hormone, or ADH. Vasopressin's job is to tell your kidneys to stop producing urine at night. In a healthy young person, vasopressin levels rise in the evening and stay elevated throughout the night. That's why a 20-year-old can drink a glass of water before bed and sleep through the night without waking up. But after age 60, vasopressin production naturally declines by 30 to 50%. And here's the kicker. Cortisol directly suppresses vasopressin. So when your cortisol spikes at 2 or 3 a.m., your already low vasopressin drops even further. A groundbreaking study published in 2023 measured both cortisol and vasopressin levels throughout the night in men over 60. They found that during the 2 to 4 a.m. window, men who woke up to urinate had cortisol levels that were 47% higher and vasopressin levels that were 34% lower compared to baseline. So you've got a double whammy: high cortisol telling your kidneys to make more urine, and low vasopressin failing to shut off urine production. The result? Your bladder fills up fast, and you wake up with an overwhelming urge to pee. The melatonin cortisol seesaw. There is one more piece of the puzzle I need to explain, and that's melatonin. Melatonin is your sleep hormone. It rises in the evening as it gets dark. It peaks in the middle of the night, and it drops in the early morning as the sun comes up. Melatonin keeps you asleep, but it also helps regulate cortisol. In a healthy person, when melatonin is high, cortisol is low. They work like a seesaw. When one goes up, the other goes down. But after age 60, melatonin production drops by about 40%. And when melatonin drops, cortisol is no longer kept in check. So cortisol starts rising earlier. One study found that men over 60 with low nighttime melatonin levels had cortisol that started rising at 2:33 a.m. on average. Men with normal melatonin levels didn't see cortisol rise until 4:18 a.m., almost 2 hours later. And here's what's really interesting. When they gave the low melatonin group a melatonin supplement at bedtime, their cortisol rise was delayed by an average of 76 minutes, and their nighttime urination episodes dropped by 41%. So melatonin isn't just a sleep aid, it's also a cortisol regulator. And when your melatonin is too low, your cortisol goes haywire. The 3 tests you need. All right, so if you're waking up between 2 and 4 a.m. to pee, here are the 3 tests you need to figure out exactly what's going on. Test number 1, a 4-point salivary cortisol test. This test measures your cortisol at 4 different times throughout the day. When you wake up, at noon, in the late afternoon, and right before bed. Ideally, your morning cortisol should be high, your noon and afternoon cortisol should be moderate, and your bedtime cortisol should be low. If your bedtime cortisol is elevated, or if your curve is flat, that's a sign your cortisol rhythm is disrupted. You can order this test online or through a functional medicine doctor. It's not expensive, and it gives you incredibly valuable information. Test number 2, fasting blood sugar and hemoglobin, A1C. These tests tell you if blood sugar dysregulation is contributing to your nighttime awakenings. Fasting blood sugar should be below 90 milligrams per deciliter ideally. Hemoglobin, A1C, should be below 5.5%. If your fasting blood sugar is above 100 or your A1C is above 5.7, you have some degree of insulin resistance, and that's likely causing nighttime blood sugar crashes and cortisol spikes. Test number 3, total and free testosterone. Testosterone should be measured in the morning when it's at its peak. Total testosterone should ideally be above 500 nanograms per deciliter. Free testosterone should be in the upper half of the reference range. If your testosterone is low, that's contributing to your cortisol dysregulation, and addressing low testosterone will help fix your cortisol rhythm. These 3 tests, cortisol, blood sugar, and testosterone, will give you a complete picture of what's driving your 2 to 4 a.m. wake-ups. The complete 2 to 4 a.m. solution protocol. All right, now let's talk about the solution. This protocol is based on 6 major studies published between 2020 and 2024, and the results are incredible. Men who followed this protocol saw their nighttime urination between 2 and 4 a.m. drop by 67%. Their sleep quality improved by 54%. And their overall quality of life went up dramatically within 8 to 12 weeks. Step 1, reset your cortisol rhythm with strategic stress management. You have to bring down your baseline cortisol during the day so it can drop properly at night. The single best way to do this is with daily stress reduction practices, 10 to 15 minutes of meditation or deep breathing in the morning and again in the evening. One study found that men who did this for 8 weeks had 31% lower evening cortisol and cortisol that didn't start rising until 93 minutes later in the morning. Also, avoid stressful activities after 6 p.m. No work emails, no arguments, no stressful news or TV shows. Keep your evenings calm and relaxing. Step 2. Stabilize your blood sugar throughout the day and night. This is huge. You need to prevent those nighttime blood sugar crashes that trigger cortisol spikes. First, Eat a balanced dinner with protein, healthy fats, and fiber-rich carbohydrates. Avoid high glycemic foods like white rice, white bread, and sugary desserts. These cause blood sugar spikes and crashes. Second, consider having a small bedtime snack that combines protein and fat, a handful of almonds, a tablespoon of almond butter, a small piece of cheese. This keeps your blood sugar stable through the night. One study found that men who had a small protein-fat snack at bedtime had 43% fewer blood sugar drops below 70 and 51% fewer cortisol spikes between 2 and 4 a.m. Step 3. Support vasopressin production naturally. There are a few things you can do to boost your vasopressin levels and help your kidneys shut off urine production at night. First, make sure you're adequately hydrated during the day. Chronic dehydration actually suppresses vasopressin production. Drink most of your water before 2 p.m., then taper off in the evening. Second, avoid excessive salt intake, especially at dinner. High sodium suppresses vasopressin. Keep your dinner sodium under 500 milligrams. Third, consider a small dose of desmopressin, which is a synthetic version of vasopressin. This is a prescription medication. Talk to your doctor about whether it's appropriate for you. One study found that low-dose desmopressin at bedtime reduced nighttime urination by 56% in men over 60. Step 4. Optimize your melatonin levels. If your melatonin is too low, your cortisol will run wild, so you need to support healthy melatonin production. First, get bright light exposure in the morning. 15 to 30 minutes of sunlight within an hour of waking up helps set your circadian rhythm and supports melatonin production at night. Second, avoid blue light in the evening. No screens at least 1 hour before bed, or use blue light blocking glasses if you must use screens. Third, keep your bedroom completely dark. Even small amounts of light can suppress melatonin. Use blackout curtains or an eye mask. And fourth, consider a melatonin supplement. Start with a low dose, 0.5 milligram to 1 milligram, taken 1 to 2 hours before bed. Don't take more than 3 milligrams. Higher doses can actually disrupt your cortisol rhythm. One study found that men over 60 who took 1 milligram of melatonin at 9 p.m. had cortisol that rose 76 minutes later in the morning, and their nighttime urination dropped by 41%. Step 5. Address underlying sleep apnea if present. If you snore loudly or your partner has noticed you stop breathing at night, you need a sleep study. Sleep apnea is one of the biggest drivers of cortisol dysregulation. Treating sleep apnea with CPAP or another intervention can dramatically improve your cortisol rhythm and reduce nighttime urination. One study found that men who started CPAP therapy had cortisol that rose an average of 53 minutes later in the morning within just 4 weeks, and their nighttime bathroom trips dropped by 47%. Step 6. Consider testosterone optimization if levels are low. If your testosterone is below 400, talk to your doctor about testosterone replacement therapy. Optimizing testosterone helps regulate cortisol and can significantly reduce nighttime urination. One study followed men over 60 who started testosterone therapy. After 12 weeks, their cortisol rhythm had normalized. Their cortisol started rising an average of 82 minutes later, and their nighttime urination dropped by 53%. The 8 to 12 week timeline. So what can you expect if you follow this protocol? Let me give you a realistic timeline. Weeks 1 to 2. You're implementing the strategies. You might not notice huge changes yet, but you should start feeling a bit more relaxed in the evenings. Your stress levels should start coming down. Weeks 3 to 4. This is where you'll notice the first improvements. You might start waking up at 3:30 or 4 a.m. instead of 2 or 2:30. That's a good sign. It means your cortisol is starting to shift later. Weeks 5 to 8. Major improvements happen here. Many men find they're only waking up once, and it's closer to 4:30 or 5 a.m. instead of 2 or 3. Some nights you might even sleep through to your alarm. Weeks 9 to 12. This is where the full benefits kick in. Most men are down to 1 wake-up per night or less, and when they do wake up, it's much later in the morning. Their cortisol rhythm has normalized. their vasopressin is working properly, and their bladder is finally letting them sleep. And the best part? As long as you maintain the protocol, the benefits continue long-term. Real patient story. Let me tell you about Edward. He's 69 years old. For the past 4 years, he'd been waking up like clockwork at 2:30 a.m. to pee, then again at 4 a.m., sometimes even a third time at 5:30. He was exhausted all the time. He'd tried everything. Limiting fluids, medications for his prostate, nothing worked. He was convinced he'd just have to live with it for the rest of his life. When he came to see me, I explained the cortisol connection. We ran his salivary cortisol test. His evening cortisol was way too high, and his curve was completely flat. We also found that his fasting blood sugar was 108, and his testosterone was 287. So we put him on the full protocol. Daily meditation, blood sugar stabilization with a better dinner and a small bedtime snack, 1 milligram of melatonin at 9 p.m. And we started him on testosterone therapy. Within 4 weeks, he was waking up at 3:15 instead of 2:30. Still not great, but progress. By 8 weeks, he was waking up once around 4:30, and by 12 weeks, he was sleeping straight through to 5:30 or 6 a.m. most nights. He told me, "I can't believe the answer was my hormones. I thought it was my prostate. I thought it was just my age. But it was cortisol and testosterone the whole time." The mistake most men make. Here's the biggest mistake I see men make. They focus on their bladder and their prostate. They take medications to shrink their prostate. They do pelvic floor exercises. They limit their fluids. And none of it works because they're treating the symptom, not the cause. The cause is hormonal. Your cortisol is rising too early. Your vasopressin is too low. Your melatonin is too low. And possibly your testosterone is too low. When you fix the hormones, the bladder symptoms go away. It's that simple. So stop blaming your bladder. Stop blaming your prostate. Start looking at your hormones. Get tested. And follow the protocol I just laid out. Final thoughts. Look, I know waking up between 2 and 4 a.m. is frustrating. It ruins your sleep. It leaves you exhausted the next day. And it makes you feel like you're getting old. But here's the good news. It's fixable. It's not just age. It's not inevitable. And you don't have to live with it. When you understand that it's your cortisol rhythm causing the problem, and when you take the steps to fix that rhythm, your nighttime urination improves dramatically. Most men see a 60 to 70% reduction in bathroom trips within 2 to 3 months. So here's what I want you to do right now. If you're waking up between 2 and 4 a.m., commit to this protocol. Get your cortisol tested. Get your blood sugar and testosterone checked, and implement the 6 steps I just shared. And I want to hear from you. Comment below and tell me, what time do you usually wake up? Is it between 2 and 4 a.m.? And are you going to get your cortisol tested? Let me know where you're watching from. If this video helped you, smash that like button. Share it with another man who's dealing with this. And subscribe to Senior Health Tips for more solutions that actually address the root cause. Your sleep is too important to ignore. Let's fix it together. I'll see you in the next video.